Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the PG Show, where we talk about all things college football. Today, I want to talk about the Texas Longhorns and what we should be expecting in this 2022 season and in the upcoming 2023 recruiting class. But before we do that, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. Let us know what you guys are thinking down in the comments below, not only about just what you guys want to see in the 2022 season, but what prospects are you guys excited for? All right, everybody. So today I have Jonathan Davis on with me from the Locked On Longhorns podcast. I'm sorry if I just said that wrong, but hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Hook 'em. You said it right. Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And excited to be here on the PG Show, talking about UT and Oklahoma. Anytime we can do a little Red River collab. It's friendlier on the podcast than it is in the real games, but it's always fun to talk about your bitter rival and see what's going on the other side.
It is. It is. So obviously, you guys can tell I am a huge OU fan. So being able to give you guys a little bit of perspective into the Texas Longhorns football program is a little bit hard for me. So, Jonathan, can you just give us a little bit insight of what you guys are excited for in this upcoming 2022 season? And, let's just answer the question. Do you think Texas is back?
So the Longhorn Nation gets mad at me when I say it, and as a podcast host, it's about being out front, right? It's about putting your opinion out there and, whatever happens, happens. So yes, Texas is back. I've been saying it since January 31st. The Longhorn fans, they want me to take a wait and see approach and wait till we win 15 national championships before I say it, but I'm saying it now. Texas is back, right? Sue me, right? And you can come back and you can pull this clip in 8 months, however you want to either support me or say I was wrong. But yes, Texas is back. What we're excited about going into the 2022 season, I know we had the longest losing streak for Texas football since the 50s. I know we lost to Kansas. I know it looked bad at times. I get that. But I think, the defense was really bad. The defense could have been a lot better. You're ranked 100th in the country. This will be the first time that Texas has had the same defensive coordinator in 4 years. So the last 3 years, they had a different defensive coordinator all 3 years. This will be Pete Kakowski's second year. You're also bringing in Gary Patterson, who could be a head coach at a lot of programs, decided to be a special assistant to Sark. He's coming in to help with that defense. So I think the defense will be a lot better. It was ranked 100th in the country last year. And what I've told a lot of people is you'll be hard-pressed to find a lot of football teams in the country, let alone the Big 12, that got better at every positional group. And I'm going to walk you through this for the Texas Longhorns, why the Texas Longhorns are back and why they'll be better in 2022 and why the fans are excited. Quarterback, we got better. Quinn Ewers will be the starter over Hudson Card. We got better at that position. If we didn't get better at running back, we didn't need to because we brought back the best running back in the country in Bijan Robinson. Receiver, we got better. We brought back Xavier Worthy, freshman All-American. He's a preseason All-American. Jordan Whittington, we're hoping for a full season of health from him. And then you're looking at a Jai Hall, who you brought in through the transfer portal. Nick Saban has said he's one of the most talented wide receivers he's ever coached. And he's put 7 first-rounders in the NFL. So he knows what a talented wide receiver looks like. We brought in Isaiah Nair, who had 878 yards and 12 touchdowns, averaged 20 yards of reception last year at Wyoming. You look at tight end, they brought in Jaleel Billingsley from Alabama, one of the top tight ends in the country, one of the most talented tight ends. He has legitimate first-round talent. We'll see what he's able to do at Texas if he can actually, fulfill that. But then you have a 5-star behind him and JT Sanders. The offensive line is still going to be a question mark, definitely. But you brought in the highest graded offensive line class of all time. You would like to think at least 2 of them can come in and be viable starters on the offensive line. The defensive line got better. Everybody talks about that offensive line class from the 2022 class. Nobody talks about how they brought in 8 defensive linemen, 15 total players in the trenches. Linebacker, they've got better. They brought in Diamante Tucker Dorsey from James Madison, a freak at the linebacker position, undersized, but just a playmaker that I think he's going to compete for snaps. And then in the DB room, they got really better through the 2022 class and through the transfer portal as well. So I look at this Texas team and I look at a lot of the games they lost last year. This was a 5-win team on paper, but I don't think it was a 5-win team. They had a 25-point lead on Oklahoma. We know how that ended. They had a lead on Baylor going into the fourth quarter, a lead on Oklahoma State going into the fourth quarter. They didn't score at all in the second half against Iowa State. They got blown off the field by Arkansas. Just a lot happened, right? And we talked about the culture. The team, I feel like last year had talent, but they just didn't know how to win, really were focused on themselves, and just couldn't get the job done. I think you're going to see this is a better team talent-wise. It's a more focused team, a more energized team, a more accountable team. And I think this is the year where the talent and the energy around the team meet each other and they go out and compete for a Big 12 championship. So they've gotten better at every position. I think Sark has more of a hold on this football team. They've brought in young position coaches who have brought a different energy to this football team. And as you can see with the 2022 and 2023 recruiting classes, people are believing in what Sark in Texas is selling. And that's why I think going into this next year, with all of the talent that they've added, I mean, you're bringing in one of the highest graded quarterbacks in all time in Quinn Ewers. We know that quarterback is the most important position in college football. I do not see how Texas does not end up in the Big 12 championship game this year.
Yeah, that'd be awesome to see OU and Texas play in that championship game again. Maybe you guys can get that revenge.
That's my pick.
Ticket from you guys with Kyler Murray.
That's my pick.
Yeah, so, you kind of talked about it, right? With Texas getting better at a lot of those skilled positions and getting back to some of those skilled players. And I think, a lot of people could make the argument that, hey, is Texas back? And it's the argument that they didn't have anybody drafted last year. Like, I don't know if the development has technically been there. And so, yeah, it's great to have the skilled players, but can they develop them? And so that kind of leads into kind of what I'm talking about here. You mentioned Hudson Card, but I think you missed out on Malik Murphy. I think Malik Murphy could be pretty good for you guys. And I think he's not talked about enough. He might not start this year, but I think even next year with Arch coming in, I think Malik Murphy could cause some problems in that quarterback room where he could potentially play for a starting role over Quinn Ewers, or maybe where Arch wants to have to sit a year. And so what do you think Sark needs to do for Ewers to be successful this year and then maybe even next year?
So as far as Malik Murphy, he's a really talented, quarterback out of California. But you look at Hudson Card, he was the second rated quarterback in his class. I think that when you get to a certain level of a program, this is the level that all of the top schools deal with, right? This is a good problem that all of the top schools deal with. Who's going to start at the quarterback position? You're going to have 3-4 talented quarterbacks on the roster. Alabama had Mac Jones, Tua, and Jalen Hurts, who are 3 starting NFL quarterbacks right now. And then Bryce Young came right after him, and he's going to be starting in the NFL in a few years. So, I think Malik Murphy is really talented, but, he injured his ankle in the state championship game. He wasn't able to participate until halfway through the spring. And really, it's just a 2-horse race going into this year with Quinn Ewers and Hudson Card. And I talked about, there have only been 3 quarterbacks ever to get that perfect 1,000 24/7 composite score. One of them is Vince Young. One of them is Arch Manning. But the other one is Quinn Ewers. And I think Quinn Ewers has all the talent in the world to be able to not only start for the next 2 years and dominate. I think he has that type of talent level at the quarterback position. And so what I think Sark needs to do to make sure that Quinn Ewers is comfortable is I think that he needs to, they say that you would rather have to rein somebody in a little bit than tell somebody to go all out, right? And I think with Quinn Ewers, you're not going to have to tell him to go all out. You're going to have to rein him in a little bit because he's a gunslinger that feels like he can make every throw. And he's going to make some spectacular throws this year. He's going to make some Sports Center top 10 type throws this year. But because he believes he can make every throw, he's also going to throw some interceptions. So what I say is to make sure that he can come out and utilize that talent the way that, we saw it in high school and maybe come out and be one of the best quarterbacks in college football this year is you're going to have to put him in a position to where he can utilize that talent, but also put him in a position to where his reads are easy, his concepts are easy, and he's not out there forcing stuff because we know that because he's a gunslinger and he feels like he can make every throw, he's going to throw some interceptions. So I think Sark needs to put him in a position to where if he needs to rein him in a little bit, he can. But ultimately, he's putting him in the spotlight and saying, Quinn Ewers, go be Quinn Ewers and don't be anybody other than Quinn Ewers.
Yeah. And so do you think there's an aspect of this to where, Sark has got to really solidify that running back room and that running game to help not only give Quinn Ewers success, but maybe even Arch or Murphy success in the future? Because I feel like that RPO is going to be important to the game for all 3 of those guys, right?
Yeah. Well, you have to. If Bijan Robinson is still the best player on your football team, you have to be a football team that is driven through the run. And you talked about it, play action in the running game is really a young quarterback's best friend. And Texas arguably has the best running back room in the country and arguably has the best running back in the country in Bijan Robinson. And so that's where Texas is going to continue to lean. They all have all of the skill positions on the outside. But when you look at Sark at Alabama, the offense largely ran through Najee Harris, right? And then Mac Jones was able to, find those receivers on the outside, off of that. But Najee Harris was a Heisman candidate, right? And Bijan Robinson is going to be a Heisman candidate. So this team will still function through the run game. They will still beat teams through the run game. And you talked about the trenches, right? They're moving towards the SEC, where it's just dominating in that run game, dominating in the trenches, and then also being able to have the ability to spread people out on the outside. So this team is going to run through Bijan Robinson, Roschon Johnson, and Keelan Robinson. But it's a luxury to have players like Xavier Worthy, Ajay Hall, and Isaiah Nair on the outside who can threaten you just as much as Bijan can in the backfield.
Yeah, and so, you talked about Bijan being a Heisman candidate. I would think Quinn Ewers could be a Heisman candidate as well, which could possibly hurt both of them, both being Heisman candidates, because, Quinn Ewers is going to have not only Worthy out there, but, he's going to have Ajay Hall and then Jaleel Billingsley, to throw that ball to. They've got a lot of weapons that he can sling that ball to, but then you got, like you said, you got Bijan Robinson in that backfield. And so I kind of wonder, do you guys think not only are you going to have a really good shot at winning the Heisman, but what do you guys think that you guys have a shot at getting two receivers at 1,000 yards receiving this year? Because it definitely seems like that's possible. It definitely seems like this Texas team is kind of built a little bit like that LSU team in 2019, right? Where they've got weapons just everywhere. They can sling the ball wherever they want to, and they can run it wherever they want to.
Yeah, I think the better comparison is Sark's offense at Alabama, all right? Like, if you look at Bijan, you could say he's Najee Harris. You could say, Xavier Worthy is, Devontae Smith, or, because he probably was the best one. Or you could say, your Jalen Waddle. Like, that's what Sark was able to build at Alabama. He's been able to bring that to Texas, right? And so, you talked about it, Bijan being a Heisman candidate. A lot of sites have Quinn Ewers as the fifth highest Heisman candidate. He's never even thrown a collegiate pass. And so that just tells you the potential that this offense has. But yeah, I definitely think, Xavier Worthy was, 19 yards away last year, 18 yards away from 1,000 yards. And he didn't have the benefit of playing a bowl game, which he obviously would have went over 1,000 yards if he played a bowl game. So I think you add at least one extra game this year, hopefully two in the Big 12 championship game. And he's going to go over 1,000 yards. And yeah, I think Jordan Whittington, if he could stay healthy, I think when he went out last year, he had more catches than Xavier Worthy. So I definitely see Jordan Whittington being able to be a 1,000-yard receiver. Isaiah Nair, like I said, he averages 20 yards of reception at Wyoming, and Wyoming only threw the ball 35% of the time. So in an offense like this, where it's going to be closer to 50, he could easily go over 1,000 yards. Ajay Hall, we'll see what he's able to do and how fast he can get acclimated. But you're looking at possibly 1,000-yard back, definitely 1,000-yard back, maybe even a 2,000-yard back, and possibly 2,000-yard receivers. I looked at it yesterday, and Sark's offense at Alabama was the highest scoring offense in college football in at least 10 years. And Texas definitely has the potential to be the first or second highest scoring offense in college football in the last 10 years. It's that deadly.
Yeah. So, it's going to be interesting, especially after watching this past OU season where OU had all those wide receiver weapons and they had the good quarterback. I don't necessarily think they had that running game behind them that was just like dominant, but it's going to be interesting to see how Texas manages not only having one good quarterback, but having two good quarterbacks, and also having a plethora of wide receivers and tight ends and having to distribute that ball. It's going to be interesting to see how they're able to do that. But kind of give me a little bit of insight to what do you think the development of the offensive line is going to be for Texas? I feel like that might have been a pain point the past couple of years. It seems like that's where Oklahoma has really gotten Texas, especially in some of their comeback wins or near comeback wins, where they've been able to get back there. And with time, it was Sam Ehlinger, just being able to rock his world. Mm-hmm. So where do you think that development lies for the Texas Longhorns in that offensive line, especially with them having probably one of the best offensive line classes we've seen?
Yeah. So you talked about it's a difference when we may have talked about this before. I hope we got on camera, but you talked about the talent that they brought in on the offensive line, right? So if I asked you if Alabama had a good offensive line, you would say yes or no.
Yes.
If I asked you if Georgia had a good offensive line, you would say yes or no.
Yes.
So before the 2022 class, from 2018 to 2021, so that's 4 years, either Georgia or Alabama had the highest graded recruiting class offensive line wise that year. So like, I think 2018 it was Georgia, 2019 it was Alabama, 2020 it was Georgia, 2021 it was Alabama, or something like that. Well, 2022 was Texas by a wide margin. I think just their offensive line recruits were graded like 151 points just from their offensive line recruits. So it starts by bringing in the better players. All right, you're bringing in a top 10 player in the country, recruit rise in Devin Campbell in the interior. You're bringing in a top 30 player in Kelvin Banks at the tackle position. I looked it up, going all the way back to 2009. Each top offensive line recruit in the country has made it to the NFL from 2022 all the way. Well, you can't do 2022 from like 2020 all the way to 2009. So that tells me that Devin Campbell has an NFL pedigree. Sark said that he believes Kelvin Banks could be a future top 5 pick in the NFL at the left tackle position. I believe Kelvin Banks has NFL pedigree because Sark has worked at the NFL level and at 3 of the top programs in college football. And so I think that the difference is you're bringing in the better players. And then you have somebody with a proven track record of finding and developing talent in Kyle Flood at that offensive line position. So that's why I have faith in the offensive line. I don't know if we'll see it turn into a Georgia-Alabama juggernaut this year. I don't even know if they have a good offensive line as Baylor this year. But I think when you talked about it, like you start to stack these recruiting classes together. Even the 2023 recruiting class, they brought in 4 really good, big body offensive linemen. So I think that you'll really start to see the benefit of the players they brought in the 2022 class in 2023 and moving forward. But like I said, a Devin Campbell can come in, a Kelvin Banks can come in, a Cole Hudson, who was an early enrollee, can come in and be viable starters on this offensive line this year. But I think they're a few years away from being dominant. But I think you have the coaches in place and the talent in place to look 2 to 3 years from now and say, okay, Texas has that Georgia, Alabama type offensive line, the type that you need to win national championships.
Yeah, you guys definitely have the talent in place. Stealing Devon Campbell from OU this year, that one stung a little bit. I thought he was going to really come to OU.
Yeah, a lot of people did.
Paying $50,000 per offensive lineman, that's
at least
it's hard to match that. It's hard to match that. And the other thing here is, you said, build that room, build that talent, right? Obviously, understanding people are going to leave, right? We're going to see that at Texas A&M. We're going to see the mass exodus out there, but it's, again, building that room, making sure that you've got people back there to take the place of somebody else if somebody leaves, and having that depth if somebody goes down, because we know those big men, they go down quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's easy for them to get hurt. They put a lot of weight on their knees and a lot of pressure. So yeah, you guys definitely have a good offensive line class, and that's probably, I think, the most important aspect for your guys' team. And I might be wrong, but I think that's probably the most important aspect for your guys' team. If you guys could solidify your offensive line and really get that strong, I think you guys could dominate a lot of teams.
Yeah.
So,
and I think the 2 biggest question marks on this team, I would say quarterback is one, but at least you're bringing in one of the most talented quarterbacks in the country. You just haven't seen him play. But I would think the 2 biggest question marks on this team, and two of the biggest factors in winning, are offensive line play and a pass rush. And so you talked about really bringing in that talent in the trenches, bringing in 7 offensive linemen, bringing in 8 defensive linemen, 15 players in the trenches in one class. I think that that's what it's about, filling those big holes on the team. Like you talked about, Texas has always been able to bring in 5-star receivers, 5-star running backs, really good quarterbacks. I don't know if they've brought in the quarterbacks people act like they have, since Colt McCoy. Garrett Gilbert never panned out. I don't know if we brought in just a great quarterback in the last 10 years. But like I said, biggest question marks, offensive line, pass rush, and Sark has done a good job through the transfer portal and through the recruiting class of trying to fill those biggest needs at Texas. Because like you said, it's been a lot of fluff on the outside, but no beef up front on the inside. And that's why they've continued to be underwhelming. And I think that's why this Texas team is different moving forward, because they've invested in the trenches for the first time since the Mac Brown era.
Yes. All right. So let's go ahead and let's switch a little bit. I want to go ahead and I want to talk about just your guys' upcoming 2022 season and your schedule, right? So I'm looking at your schedule. In your first game, you guys are going to
Let's just
play
start.
the
Let's just start
Louisiana
at week 3. We
Monroe.
can start at week 3. Let's start at week 3.
It'd be week 2. It'd be week 2. You guys play Alabama week 2. I mean, I think we can say Texas should win that Louisiana Monroe game.
Oh
You
yeah,
guys
yeah. I
should
mean,
pretty well dominate them.
if Texas loses to Louisiana Monroe, I locked on Longhorns. That might be the last episode ever because I would have nothing to be excited about if they lost to Louisiana Monroe. Yeah, Texas is starting 1-0 this year. I'll bet the bank on it. Texas is starting 1-0 this year.
All right. Well, then let's get into it. The matchup that everybody wants to talk about, everyone wants to know about, Texas versus Alabama, right? But however, it's going to be a freaking 11 o'clock game. How disappointed are you that it's an 11 o'clock game?
It's trash, honestly. And you knew when you found out that Fox had it, it was going to be a big noon kickoff game. And, it sucks. I feel like, one, it's just, it's hotter than whatever you want to add right there. Fill in the blank. In Texas, we're dealing with 103 right now, and that's not going to change by September. So it's going to be super hot, that 11 o'clock game. And I just think, man, even though there's really no true primetime games in college football, because even if you're playing at 7:30, there's other games going on. But I just think it needs to be that marquee night game, night lights, 7:30, start Central Time, and they go at it. I just think 11 is disappointing. And then you need to build up that tailgate energy, that just talk about it all day, that anticipation, that excitement. You're going to have people out there, drunk until, I guess they would do it anyway, at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, but it just doesn't hit the same. I get it with the Red River rivalry because that's how it's been for so many years. You're accustomed to it, but there's just no way that Texas, Alabama should be at 11. It should be at night, a la Texas, LSU, a few years ago with Joe Burrow.
Yeah. So what's your outcome for that game? I've kind of been torn on this, right? As an OU fan, I would love to see Texas lose every single game and always be bad. But as a college football fan and kind of a little bit for OU, I do want to see Texas be successful, because when Texas is successful, it makes OU a little bit more successful because it makes them look better. It makes our schedule look a little bit better. And so there's a kind of a part of me that goes, I want Texas to win this game. And I think they have a really good shot. I mean, they'd have the talent there to win that game. But do you think that they can put it together by week 2 to compete with Nick Saban and Bryce Young? And, they're going to have Jamar Gibbs at their running back position, and they still have Brian Robinson back there. So, what's your thoughts on that? Do you guys think you guys can beat Alabama week 2 realistically?
No. just being honest, like realistically, no. I think that if that game was at the end of the season, I would give Texas a better shot. I think this is a Texas team that's going to continue to get better each year. Not each year, each game, each week. But just the second week, I just don't think you'll be ready by then. One, you're playing Louisiana Monroe the first week, which is as far as you can get from the competition level of Alabama. So you going out there and smacking Louisiana Monroe literally does not mean anything, compared to what you're going to face the next week in Alabama. You just don't have any real time to prepare for it. And then you talked about, Alabama, they're bringing back the best offensive player in the country, at least the one that won the Heisman Trophy in Bryce Young, bringing back the best defensive player in the country, arguably the best player in the country, and Will Anderson, my God, one of the best edge rushers we've seen in college football over the last few years. I forget his name. They have another NFL caliber edge rusher on the other side of him. And you're talking about, we're probably going to have a true freshman starting at left tackle and a player that hasn't been great at UT thus far, starting at right tackle. It's just a lot, arguably the best coach of all time in college football coming in week 2. It's just a lot to deal with to say that Texas is ready to go out there and beat a team like that. I do think it'll be closer than a lot of people think. I think a lot of people, casuals are just assuming this is going to be a, 28, 30-point loss. I think we've talked about what Texas has on offense. I think it's going to be hard for Alabama to just blow them off the field with as much talent as Texas has on offense. But I can't go as far to say as they're going to beat them. That's just a lot to ask for a Texas team that's coming off a 5-win season in week 2 when they don't have any real time to prepare for a team like Alabama. And like I said, there's so many new pieces on this football team that we won't even see what this team is fully capable of until they get, probably halfway through Big 12 conference play. So to ask them to beat Alabama is just tough. I just need them to go out there, be competitive, and look like they belong on the field with Alabama. That'll be enough for me as a Texas fan.
Yeah, I mean, even if they lose by 7 or 14 points, I'm going to look at that game and go, okay, Texas, you did good. Because I would expect, quite honestly, second week for Texas to probably get, beat down in that game. I don't see how they match up well with what Alabama has. I mean, yes, I know Sark came from Alabama, but that offensive playbook has changed. I think it helps having Najee Hall come to your guys' team. I think Ajaya Hall can give a little bit of insight to that and maybe give a little insight to how Bryce Young works for your defense to maybe rattle him a little bit. But I don't know. It's going to be a tough game, but it would be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see. I don't know what the Alabama Heat compared to the Texas Heat is.
Yeah.
It's not I don't know if that's going to play a
not
factor.
as hot. I think it's like it's a difference on I think I looked it up. It's like a difference on 8 degrees, which is a lot, between that time frame in September and then in Texas and then that time frame in Alabama. You mentioned Bryce Young. Bryce Young was there under Sark, I think, before Sark left or right before Sark left. So
right before, I think it was right the year. It was the first year.
Yeah. So when Mac Jones was still the starter. So I think Sark is familiar with Bryce Young, but you just talked about it, that they have probably arguably the best pass rush in the country right now, and our offensive line is inexperienced and they haven't proved anything. And then I talked about us not really having a pass rush, and they have the Heisman winner at quarterback. So, like I said, it's just a lot to ask for Texas to beat them in week 2. But I still expect them to go out there and it be a competitive game, be an enjoyable game for sure. But like I said, I like to be the Texas fan. I like to drink the Kool-Aid, but I also like to be right. You know what I'm saying? It's tough for me to come out here and say Texas is going to win the game. I just wouldn't be being accurate.
Yeah. But at the same time, again, I got to say, I don't know if we could be shocked to see them win. It would be cool. But I don't think it's going to happen, but I don't think it's going to take us by surprise.
I'm a Texas fan, obviously, right? I host the Texas podcast, so I'm going to be a little more enthused about the team than most. So I would say it wouldn't be a surprise to me, but from the larger congregation of people that love to clown Texas for losing to Kansas and going 5-7 on Twitter, there's no way that any of them think that Texas has a chance in this game. So I do think that to people that really follow college football and know what Texas has done this offseason, I think Sark has had arguably the best offseason of any coach in college football. Then you may not be surprised. But I think to the general public, Texas beating Alabama in week 2 would be the shock of the college football season, barring maybe a few other games.
All right. So let's just say they're 1-1 there. You guys got to go stay at home, which I feel sorry for you guys. Joe Castiglione does this to us, and they asked last year, because I'm a season ticket holder for OU, and they asked me, they go, how can we make our fan experience better? Stop scheduling games in September. It's too dang hot.
Yeah.
There's no shade.
Yeah.
So this is your 3rd straight game at home.
Yeah.
Then you guys get to play UTSA in September, so it's going to be another hot game for y'all.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 7:00 game though, so maybe it'll be a little bit cooler.
Yeah.
But I would assume we can chalk that one up as a win.
Yes.
Even though UTSA has been a little bit better, we can chalk that one up.
Yes, we will. 1, just because Texas is going to beat them with superior talent. 2, you mentioned it's a night game. I will be in attendance. That's the day after my birthday, so they're going to get a win from me as well. That's all the analysis you need. Texas will be 2-1 after the UTSA game.
All right. So let's look at the next 2 games. You guys are going to go to Lubbock, play Texas Tech. Right now, that's a TBD. God, I hope that's a night game.
Yeah.
And then you guys got to West Virginia at home. So what do you think about those 2 games? Where do you guys think we stand?
Yeah, so I think those are 2 teams that are gonna be improved in 2022. I really like what West Virginia did, bringing in JT Daniels. I think that's a West Virginia team who's not going to compete for a Big 12 championship or anything like that. But I definitely think that's a team that could go out and knock off one of the Big 4 and maybe hamper their chances to get there if you're talking about Oklahoma, Texas, Oklahoma State, or Baylor. And so I think that's going to be a tough matchup. Texas Tech, we'll see who wins their quarterback competition. But I think they have the potential to be an explosive offense this year. We'll see what they'll be able to do on the defensive side. I think Texas wins both of those games, But I do think that those games, well, West Virginia beat us last year. I think that they'll beat West Virginia this year, but it's going to be a closer game. I think that's going to be a tough game for Texas, but I think talent-wise, they just beat them. Last year, we put up 70 points on Texas Tech, beat them by 35, 70-35. I don't think that happens this year, but I still think we beat Texas Tech by a couple touchdowns. So I'm going to say we beat Texas Tech by a couple touchdowns. I'm going to say we beat West Virginia by 10 points or less.
All right. And then we got probably the second biggest game on your schedule, would normally be the biggest game. But you guys are going to play OU in the Red River rivalry. You guys are the away team this year, though. OU's the home team. I don't know if that matters. I don't know what the record is with OU wearing white jerseys or red jerseys. No. So what are you excited for this year? I mean, it's the Red River rivalry. OU could be 0-5 in that game, and Texas could be 0-5 or undefeated, and it could swing either way. So what do you think?
It's going to be tough, honestly. I'm not going to predict that game right now. I've predicted Texas to go 9-3, so that means that I think they'll lose 2 games in Big 12 conference play, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's the Oklahoma Sooners. I have a lot of respect for that program. I have a lot of respect for Brent Venables and what he's been able to do on the defensive side at Clemson. And then Levy is a great offensive mind, and Dylan Gabriel has definitely proved himself in college football as well. So, like I said, I'm going to be rooting for Texas to win. I think closer to that game, I will pick Texas to win, but I will not be surprised at all if Oklahoma wins that game. I think Oklahoma definitely reloaded rather than rebuild it. And I think that, like you said, that's going to be the second toughest game on our schedule next year. And so, like you said, you could throw out the rosters, you could throw out all of that. It just comes down to who's the better team on that day. And I don't think we'll find that out till October 8th. So I'm going to push on that one and not pick that game. I got a lot of respect for Oklahoma.
All right. Yeah, I will. I'll just throw out these stats. Since 2010, after Texas went to the national championship, OU has won 9 of the last 12 Red River rivalry matchups. And they've won 10 out of the last 13 times they played Texas. One of those being the Big 12 championship games. So let's just say OU wins that game. But we all know that one could be a coin flip on the schedule. So let's just put an asterisk by that one as we could count it as a win too. So I would say what we'd be at that point be at 4-2. And this is kind of where I think Texas gets into the brutal part of their schedule, right? You have to go play Iowa State at home. I think that should be a win. But you have to go to Oklahoma State. That one's going to be pretty hard. And then you have to go to Kansas State. And that's interesting because, Kansas State has always given OU a thorn in their side, especially the past 10 years. And they're getting better, especially in 2023. They're going to be good. And then you guys got TCU with Sonny Dykes. I don't know how hard that game's going to be this year, but in the future, TCU is going to be a tough team. And then you got at Kansas. So at Kansas is going to be tough, personally, I think, because I think Leopold's turning that team around, and I think he's changing the culture at Kansas. And we saw that last year when they played OU and Texas, right? Both of those games for both of those teams were not an easy win. Like normally we would chalk those up. So, I mean, I don't know. And then everybody likes to joke around and say that's a new rivalry for Texas. But then you got at home versus Baylor to end the season. So just kind of let's run through that schedule real quick and talk about what you think, starting with Iowa State.
Iowa State, I think they just lost too much. I mean, when you look at it, how many teams in college football lost that big of a percentage of their offense? When you talk about losing Charlie Kolar, Bryce Purdy, and I'm supposed to run Breece Hall. Jeez, I'm trying to remember all of their names. Like, they just lost so much on offense. It's hard to say, okay, we're going to come back and be able to do that again. So I think they beat Iowa State in that game. I don't know if that game is particularly close. Also, like I said, Texas is going to get better each week. So I think by that time, we'll see kind of the mid-season form or end-of-season form Texas Longhorns. Remind me who's after Iowa State?
At Oklahoma State.
At Oklahoma State. So that's going to be tough. Obviously, Spencer Sanders has been in the Big 12 longer than most of us have been alive, just playing. Mike Gundy, they haven't necessarily just been a top team and gotten over the hump, but he definitely keeps a competent football team, in Stillwater. That's going to be a tough game. Like I said, when you have all of that experience at quarterback, they lost some pieces on defense, but I think there'll still be a really good defense. I think that's going to be a tough game, and it's in Stillwater, correct?
Yeah, it's in Stillwater, and I think it's important to note too. They did have a defensive coordinator change. They lost Jim Knowles.
So that's part of them losing the pieces on defense. But I think they'll still have a pretty good defense. I'm going to give Texas the win in that game. I just think that like I said, I think that Oklahoma State will be competent, but I think Texas will be more talented. And I think Spencer Sanders, as all of us Big 12 fans know, will throw a couple of them in the air. And I think the team in the burnt orange will come down with those, and that'll be the reason they win. So I'm going to give them a win against Iowa State. I'm going to give them a tough win against Oklahoma State. That game is going to come down to the wire, 7 points or less. Cool.
Okay, cool. So that puts us at 6-2, and then this is again, I think, one of your hard games, and the reason being is it's probably going to be an 11 o'clock game at Kansas State.
Tough game. Tough game. If you talked about Bijan Robinson being one of the best running backs in the country, if you continued that conversation, you would have to put Deuce Vaughn in there, right? And then you talked about Adrian Martinez coming over as a transfer as well. That gives them a boost at the quarterback position. And like you talked about, just a team that's really building something, and a team that always plays people tough. Right, a program that's definitely on the rise. I'm going to give Texas the win over Kansas State. You know, as bad as things were last year without Bijan Robinson, they went in and beat Kansas State after a 6-game losing streak. I think they're coming back this year 10 times better, 10 times tougher. So I don't think Kansas State stands a chance. But it will be a good game. But I can't see Texas losing to them or not winning that game by at least 10. So I'm going to go a double-digit win against Kansas State. But I have a lot of respect for what they're doing. I think that's another team like West Virginia who likely will knock off one of the top 4 this year. It won't be Texas, though. So I guess it'll be Oklahoma State or Baylor.
Let's be honest. If OU's going to lose one game on their schedule, it's going to be to Kansas State.
Yeah. They find a way. They find a way for sure. We'll see. It won't be to Texas, though.
Yeah. So let's just say that puts Texas at 7-2. Got to play TCU at home.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that's a win. I think you brought over Gary Patterson, right? I think that's the biggest loss for TCU was Gary Patterson. I think Sonny Dykes had a hell of a career at SMU, but I think it's going to take some time to really put his footprint on that program, and I don't think that time is going to come this year. I think TCU gets handled by Texas at home. Honestly, I think that's going to be a 14-plus point win. And like I said, by that time, Quinn Ewers is in Heisman form. Bijan Robinson is in Heisman form. Texas is really in their bag. I just think that, TCU, like I said, that's going to be a pretty easy win. Probably one of their biggest wins of the year on the schedule outside of UTSA, Louisiana Monroe, and then maybe Texas Tech. It just depends on what they're able to do at quarterback.
All right. And then we got the infamous at Kansas. Now let's just note here, Kansas might try to pull some shenanigans on you like they did us this year. I know they said, the power loss was accidental. That was not accidental.
Yeah.
The power loss was intentional because they winded down a whole quarter on us with the refs having to count that clock. So you guys are at Kansas. Should be a win. But, give us a little insight to that one.
We're going to blow Kansas off the field. I know that, people like to joke about Kansas and all of that. That was just a broken football team last year in a lot of ways. And they still put 56 points on Kansas, right? You should never lose a game where you score 56 points. So, I don't need to say much more. They're going to blow they're going to blow Kansas off the field this year. And so I guess those memes, what date is that game? All the memes that get a little bit more run into a win?
November 19th.
Yeah, and then on November 19th, we're going to put that to bed. Texas is going to dog walk Kansas, for lack of a better term.
All right, so that would put you guys at 9-2. And then you've got your last game of the year. This one's going to be the toughest one. This is going to be at home versus Baylor on November 25th. That's your weekend game for Thanksgiving. But, with Dave Aranda telling that quarterback to kick rocks because he had another one back there, honestly, in my opinion, doing the right thing, right? Hey, you're not going to be the starting quarterback.
Might as well.
Yeah, but I do think that's interesting because that means Baylor might have something back there. What do you think about that game?
So I said Texas was going 9-3, and I said we were going to lose to Alabama. I didn't pick the Oklahoma game, but you gave us a loss there. I'm fine with that. I said 9-3, so I'm going to have to put an L right here to Baylor. I think that, they're just the best team coming back, defensive line and offensive line. I think that means something. I think Dave Aranda is a hell of a coach, taking them from 2 wins to a Big 12 championship game in the span of one offseason. Big 12 championship trophy, not just game appearance. And I just think that, that may be a game where, Texas is coming off of the Kansas win. They're feeling high, feeling mighty, and might be looking, past that game a little. Well, you can't look past Baylor, but I just think that, that's one of those games where Baylor might come out more prepared. Baylor might want it more, right? And I think a Texas team that, that Kansas game might be a trap game, right? And then you come into Baylor and you're just not as ready. And Dave Aranda strikes me as the type of coach that's going to have Baylor ready through hell, sleet, rain, or snow, right? And so when you talk about just what they're able to do in trenches, I think that's a team that's not going to beat themselves. I think that Texas, as talented as they are, still have the capability to beat themselves. And like I said, if you can't get a pass rush and if their offensive line is able to dominate, that's what wins football games. And so I said they'll go 9-3. I don't know what the 2 Big 12 losses will be, but I wouldn't be surprised if Baylor is one of them. So I'm comfortable on this podcast saying that Texas will go 9-3, and the 3 losses will be to Oklahoma, Baylor, and either Oklahoma or a surprise team like a West Virginia or a Kansas State. We're not losing to Oklahoma State, though. I would not say that on this podcast.
I'm okay with that. Oklahoma State's our little brother. Yeah, we've got to keep our little brother. So, yeah, the good news is you guys don't have to go play Baylor at Waco. That's a really tough game to play Baylor at Waco.
Yeah.
But I think that's a game where you just got to add that asterisk. Texas could win that game.
Yeah.
They could.
Yeah.
It's a toss-up. So, it right there tells me with 2 toss-up games for Texas on the board, they could either be 11-1 or 9-3 or 10-2.
Yeah.
I think they could go either of those ways.
Yeah. I think that's the spectrum that you want to keep them in. My bad. I think that's the spectrum that you want to keep them in, between 9-3 and 11-1. I think anything less than that would be a disappointment. And even, talking 11-1, like we're only lose. I just think that, you can change your whole college football team in a year, but it still takes time to really build a contender. And just to say that we'll be able to go out and not lose at all in the Big 12, I just don't know if we're ready for that. There's some really good teams in the Big 12, and just anything can happen, So, but yeah, I think that with the talent this team has, I think that 9 wins should be the goal. And honestly, I think it should be the floor for this football team this year.
Yeah. I know we're talking about Texas, but do you think Baylor has the best defense in the college football this season with what they have returning and Dave Aranda back there? I know they probably don't have the best defensive players, but as a collective, like what we saw with OSU, they could be the best.
I don't think they have the best defense, and there's so much to factor in going into that. We talked about what Alabama is able to do with that pass rush. They also had a lot of really young corners last year that are coming back, like Kool-Aid McKinstry. And then they got Eli Ricks, the transfer from LSU. So it may be chalk, but I'm going to say that if you have those type of players in your pass rush and you have those type of players on the back end, as talented at the cornerback position as they are, we know that they keep safeties and we know that they keep linebackers. So it's tough for me to put anybody over Alabama. And then we know that, Georgia's defense isn't going to be as good as it was last year, but a lot of people think that they're bringing back the best D tackle in the country in Jalen Carter. So they're still going to be really good as well. We know that Kirby Smart is a defensive mastermind. So I think that Baylor is one of those teams where you look at maybe the top 10 to 15 and you say, oh, I didn't expect to see them here, but I can't go best defense in the country. Like I said, I got to give grace to Nick Saban and what they have on the defensive side. Like I said, they have 2 of the best pass rushers in the country and the best pass rusher in the country and 2 of the best corners in the country. That's a really good recipe to have a good defense.
All right, let's go ahead and let's talk about just the recruiting class and some of those prospects that you guys have coming up, and we can make this one really quick. But you guys right now are ranked number 4. You guys have had a surging. You got
4 on where?
247
on what site?
Sports is where I'm pulling this from.
We moved down to 4. Who moved ahead of us? I haven't looked at it today. I know Notre Dame and Ohio State are ahead of us, but who else? Who would have moved ahead of us?
1, and Ohio State's at number 2. Let me pull up who's number 3. Team rankings. Here we go. It looks like Clemson moved up to number 3 because they got Peter Woods last night.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
they just got a 5-star. Yeah,
defensive
okay.
line for
That
the
makes
Blitz.
sense.
And they have 14 4-stars.
It's let me add some context to this for everybody listening. Clemson is at 260.28 points. Texas is at 260.24 points. So we're literally talking about a 0.04 point difference between the third recruiting class and the fourth recruiting class. So let's just say that Texas is at 3.5 right now.
Yeah, and let's be honest, they're going to finish above Clemson anyways. Because here's the thing. Notre Dame, Ohio State, Clemson, Texas, you guys are all 18, 17, or 19 commits in your class, meaning you guys are probably coming up towards the end of how many recruits you're going to get. I would assume each one of those classes are probably going to be anywhere from 20 to 24 recruits. So you guys are getting close. But you guys have a really good 2023 class. You guys have been surging since Arch Manning said that he was going to come to Texas. Probably one of the best recruits we've ever seen in college football. But what do you guys expect for this? Like, realistically, where do you guys think you're going to land? Personally, in my opinion, I don't think Arch is going to end as the best quarterback in this class, because I think right now, as it sits, Malachi Nelson could be considered the best quarterback in this class, just depending on who you talk to. I think there's a reason why Lincoln Riley didn't go recruit Arch, right? And, I hate the fact that we call Lincoln – I didn't even like it at OU, how we called Lincoln Riley the quarterback whisperer, just because I think it's a bad narrative, right? You don't want to get a ton of great quarterbacks here and then they not pan out. So I think it could flip. But, we've also seen Jackson Arnold surging, especially with winning the MVP in the Elite 11. And there's some talks that he could end up being the best quarterback in this class.
Of course, on the Oklahoma podcast, we got to talk Jackson Arnold, right?
But, where do you think your guys' class is going to land up, and what prospect are you guys most excited for?
I think the top three is the floor. I've brought John Garcia from Sports Illustrated on a lot, and we talk about the difference from a top 5 and a top 3 class. If you look at it last year, I forget the numbers off the top of my head, but the difference between Georgia's number 3 class and Texas's number 5 class was at least 20 points. So you're talking about, that's 2 5-star players worth of points. And then the difference between them and Texas A&M's class was like 40 points, right? So there's a huge difference. So I think that they'll end up in the top 3, which is the elite of the elite. I think there's a separation between the top 3 class and the top 5 class. I think the top 3 probably ends up the way it's looking kind of right now, unless Georgia or Alabama can crash that party with Notre Dame, Ohio State, and then a Texas in there in the top 3. I think that people are really excited about this recruiting class because the 2022 recruiting class was top 5, and people said, okay, Sark was able to do that coming off of a 5-7 season. But then you come back in the 2023 recruiting class, and you're looking like you're about to blow that class out of the water. Now, you're still looking at a lot of prospects. They've already brought in 3 5-stars in Derek Williams, Johntay Cook, and Arch Manning. I think that the player that most people will be excited about, the player that we're going to look back and say was probably the best player from this class, excluding Arch Manning, is probably going to be Johntay Cook, the receiver out of DeSoto. I just think he's a game changer, right? He's already a polished route runner, very competitive. I think that he's going to be one of the best receivers in college football, a Biletnikoff candidate. And I think he's going to be somebody that's going to be on the field next year with Quinn Ewers. He's going to play as a true freshman. I think he's that good. And we could look back and say he was the best receiver in this class, even though I think he's ranked at 5th or 6th right now. I think that when you look at the best linebacker in the country, and Anthony Hicks, he's down at Texas A&M and Texas. I think that if we were to get him, Texas hasn't brought in a prospect like that in a long time, like the best linebacker in the country, somebody who's going to be, the quarterback of your defense for years to come. So I think if they're able to land Anthony Hicks, I think that he becomes a candidate of the player you're most excited to watch in this recruiting class. So to answer your 2 questions, I think that this is a top 3 class. I think that's the floor for this class. I think the ceiling is top 1 class. I think the floor is top 3. And I think that 2 prospects that outside of Arch Manning people are going to be most excited to watch is going to be Johntay Cook, who's already committed, and Anthony Hicks, who is a possible commitment. Anthony Hill. I don't know why I keep saying Anthony Hill. Anthony Hill. I think of David Hicks. Anthony Hill. I probably said Hicks a million times. Anthony Hill, who might commit to Texas, and Johntay Cook, who has committed to Texas, will be the 2 players to watch out for from that recruiting class. And I'll also throw Derek Williams in there just because John Garcia from Sports Illustrated talks so much about how he loves him. a 5-star safety out of Louisiana. And so he can make some plays as well. Really quickly to your Arch Manning point, I don't think what you're saying is crazy. If the top 3 prospects in the country are all quarterbacks, that tells me that they all have a chance to be the top players in their class, right? I think that Arch Manning is number 1, but I think Malachi Nelson may have a higher ceiling just because of the freaky arm talent that he has to be the best quarterback in the class. Obviously, we know that Nico, might be the most talented player in the class, right? If you could get the most out of him, I mean, the sky is the limit, or the limit is the sky when you're talking about him. I mean, my gosh. And then you're talking about a Johntay Moore. You're talking about a Jalen Rashada. You're talking about a Jackson Arnold. So it's a lot of good signal callers in this class. And I wouldn't be surprised if Arch doesn't end up being the best quarterback in this class. Because like I said, there's a couple of quarterbacks with some freaky upside. But I think you'd be hard-pressed to say that Arch won't be a good quarterback. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to say that Arch won't end up being a top 3 quarterback in this class, which I think will still be really good at the collegiate level and good enough to put him in the NFL.
For all you Texas fans, Arch is going to be a better NFL recruit, NFL quarterback than he will a college quarterback. So if he's really good in college, wait for the NFL. So
yeah, and it could be a situation like, Caleb Williams was rated lower than Quinn Ewers, and Caleb Williams might be better than Quinn Ewers, and that's not to say that Quinn Ewers won't be outstanding, right? I think Bryce Young was rated over CJ Stroud. A lot of people think CJ Stroud is better than Bryce Young. So, being the second or third best player in your recruiting class, you're still going to turn out to be a hell of a collegiate football player. So even if Malachi, Nico, I'm not going to say Jackson, but if Malachi, Nico, Jalen Rashada, or Johntay Moore end up being better than Arch, like I said, I think you'd be hard pressed to truly believe that Arch won't be successful at Texas.
And Arch is going to be successful because he's got the last name Manning behind him, and that Manning name is going to do its recruiting on its own. So because it's going to do its recruiting on its own, he's going to get
as you've seen. Yeah, as you've seen, and I actually talked with a recruit and confirmed this, is that the reason it literally was the Arch impact, because so many players were like, okay, these. You talked about our recruiting class. We took 28 players in our recruiting class last year. We're definitely not going to take 28 this year. And so, you look at it and those players said, okay, I need to commit now because these slots are going to fill up fast. And I want to be a part of this recruiting class. I want to go to Texas. I want to play with Arch Manning. And so you saw what I think it was 10 recruits, 10 commitments in an 11-day span. And so, yeah, like you said, that name recruits for itself. And we've already seen that where Texas was ranked 24th before Arch committed. And they moved up to 3rd within the span of a week.
No, for sure. Well, hey, I really appreciate it. I know for everybody, it's 12:45 where we're at, and we both have to be leave by 1 o'clock because we got other obligations. So, but Jonathan, I really appreciate you coming on. I really appreciate you just giving us a little insight into Texas football and what you guys are expecting and what you guys are wanting to see. I know I'm really excited for this upcoming football season. I'm sure you're really excited too, and I'm sure everybody else here is excited. So, everybody, just let us know what you guys are excited for in this upcoming 2022 season. Let us know what prospect you guys are most excited for. Jonathan, is there anything else you want to say to everybody before we head out?
Yes, 12:45. It's 12:45 and OU still. Hook 'em. Hey, make sure you're checking out Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And make sure you're checking out the PG Show. My brother Preston Gant, thank you for coming and thank you for having me on. Excuse me. But I know you'll be able to come on Locked On Longhorns in the future to talk OU recruiting and do another kind of, I know you're doing all college football, but do another, resemblance of a Red River Shootout podcast version. So I can't wait for
sure.
that.
And everybody, I will include the link to his page as well, so you can click in. Make sure to go give him a subscribe, a follow, a like. I've watched a couple of his videos, and they're pretty good. And he's actually got some pretty good interviews up there as well. So you might want to go check those out. So, all right.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you guys watching. Please hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you guys next time.